Third is that we request you to keep yourselves on mute for the duration of the panel so as to not cause any unnecessary distractions. And lastly, please submit any questions you may have in the chat box. We will keep an eye on it in the Q&A section towards the end. Alternatively, you can also choose to ask your questions during the Q&A section itself. Thanks, Neha. Next slide. We are here today to discuss the case for context. Why is it that cultural context matters when we're talking about economic research? And once we've established the why, how do we ensure that our research accounts for cultural nuances? I will be your moderator today. Neha, if you could go to the next slide. Thank you. I will be your moderator today. I'm Rashi, a senior associate with the partnerships team at the Good Business Lab, and I work with our partner organizations in South Asia, North America, and South America. We will be joined by our panelists today, who are Smit, who is the Associate Director of the Research and Data Vertical at the Good Business Lab and brings over 8 years of experience in monitoring and evaluation, and Andrea, who is the Research Manager with GDL Latin America and handles the portfolio of our projects in Latin America. Next. Good Business Lab is an international labor innovation organization that uses rigorous research methods to find the sweet spot between worker well-being and business interests, and through that, make a business case for worker well-being. Bringing these two often very distinct worlds together, we believe is the most sustainable way to transform labor markets and allow workers to live dignified lives. Next. We engage a lot with the private sector, and we believe that leveraging them to better conditions for workers is the most sustainable way forward. In our projects normally follow a 4-stage life cycle. The first is to listen. We listen to workers' needs to understand the challenges that they face, making sure to center our research around these concerns. The next stage is to co-design interventions and solutions with our partners, which include the workers and the private firms that we work with. The third stage is the impact of our solution and intervention. And the last stage is dissemination and scale. Once we've found success with an intervention, we lead businesses to adopt these interventions and productize research learnings to take them to the market. Next. In our years of experience, we found some common concerns, which has allowed us to hone in our research on 4 key focus areas. The first is unlocking female labor. As we all know, women's global labor force participation rate is much lower than that of men. This is a pain point that we recognize, and we design projects to enable women to engage in paid work, to unlock their potential, and also access economic opportunities. A second focus area for us is closing the skill gap. Workers often lack the technical and sometimes more importantly, the soft skills to continue improving at their job and otherwise. Our projects identify skills that workers need to grow at work, as well as incentivize the firms to train workers in these skills. Third focus area is improving work environment. Poor working conditions from temperature at the workplace, which is also a climate concern, but also harassment from superiors, which is very often a gender concern, hold workers back. We design projects to make factories a better place to work while addressing these other areas as well. The last key area is building holistic health, where we find that poor physical and mental health affect workers' quality of life and work. Through our project, we explore the provision for basic health services to enable healthier workers. In today's discussion, we will mainly be focusing on the first 2 focus areas, unlocking female labor and closing the skill gap. Next. As you can see from the slide on my screen, we have worked in a variety of different countries and many different industries while focusing on these key themes and worker well-being. In working on various projects across borders and different sectors, but on similar themes, we've seen firsthand that results don't always translate across industries and boundaries, and hence the need to have a very delicate balance. The balance between designing projects that take into account cultural context, but also ensuring that we're not starting from scratch and that our research is building upon itself rather than being conducted in silos. Next. Accounting for culture and context in economic research, particularly monitoring and evaluation, requires a thoughtful and comprehensive approach. Some of the key considerations that we keep in mind are first, contextual understanding. Gaining a deep understanding of the social, political, and sometimes even historical context in which the economic interventions or programs are taking place is very important. This allows us to recognize how these factors may shape economic behaviors and outcomes. Second is cultural competence. Where possible, we prefer to work with local researchers who can bring a deeper understanding of cultural context and also make sure that lack of language knowledge is not a barrier for us in the region. Third is having a mixed methods approach that combines quantitative data and qualitative insights. Quantitative data provides the all-important numbers, right? The numerical indicators. While qualitative data such as interviews, focus groups, case studies, they really help capture the complexities of cultural context, which helps us design our studies and interventions much better. The fourth is having a participatory approach, involving local communities and stakeholders in the research process. Through this, we can foster an environment of collaborative learning and knowledge sharing amongst the researchers, evaluators, and the local stakeholders that we're working with. This allows for continuous reflection, adaptation, and improvement of our evaluation approaches based on local insights. What all of this distills into is the last point, which is adaptation and localization. All of the work we do beforehand allows us to tailor evaluation methods and tools to the specific cultural context we're working with. It is very important that we're open to adapting our evaluation frameworks and indicators to ensure that they align with local values, norms, and aspirations, even when we may have done similar studies earlier in different contexts. So having gone through these basics, and before we dive deeper into our discussion, I would like to invite Smit and Andrea to walk us through some of our projects and set up the basis for the panel discussion that is to follow. Over to you, Smit.
Thanks, Rashi, and thanks everyone, especially from people from India who are joining in a bit late. So for this slide, I just want to walk you through some of the projects we're working on, not take too much time in going to detail, because I think we want to focus more on the discussion later, but I think this will kind of give a lot of people an idea about what we are doing and where we are taking this from. So I think as a lot of GPL presentation starts, I want to start with the evaluation of PACE program. So I just want to highlight that GPL didn't design this program. This was essentially a program by GAP, and this was essentially designed very close collaboration with Shahi Export, which is our kind of very close partner in India. And this is a kind of a soft skills training program or life skills training program for women, garment workers. It covers around 60 hours of time. And so this was evaluation that we did in 2012. And what kind of set tone for a lot of the work that we have coming later. So this is something where essentially identifying what areas people can essentially go on and then work with, right? Next slide. So when we understood this impact, hey folks, give me a second. Oh, nantar, bye, run. Sorry for that. Yeah. So when we kind of did this program for garment workers in factories, when essentially the main impact of that was that the quantitative evaluation showed positive impacts on numbers, but also there was a lot of feedback that went throughout the firm, which kind of bought buy-in from the firm for this intervention. And when we did that, there was a lot of demand where because this kind of programs are rare, especially for frontline managers. So usually in garments, you have kind of 40 to 50 workers working on production line. And on top of that, there's one or probably two supervisors managing it. So there's a lot of these supervisors rise up from being technical workers to managers, and they don't necessarily get a lot of management training, right? So then most of the training is technical rather than managerial training or soft skill training. So kind of based on this feedback, this is the training program that was developed by GBL in close collaboration with our partner Shy Exports. And this is the program where we kind of understood what we learned from previous program, uh, took inputs from academia and kind of for building soft skills, but then also pilot tested a lot with the partner firm to kind of firm up the modules which they think are important. Next slide, please. So this is a program that we are evaluating as external partners, and this is in completely different context, which is we are evaluating ILO has an in-business soft skill training program, which is kind of targeting women in STEM. And then this essentially program is where essentially ILO facilitates learning of this program where companies can essentially decide which module they want to do, how they want to do, and ILO will kind of facilitate training of the trainers. And this is essentially in Thailand where we evaluated this, and we see in very different kind of context where garment is very essentially labor intensive, low capital business in India, while in this case, in a lot of cases for this program where we evaluated in one of the large scale, like a hardware manufacturer in Thailand, it was a very capital intensive business, right? And we see some differences in terms of essentially how the module is operated, what the aspirations of people were, and a lot of similarities in terms of how, where we see the impact. Next. And this is the last program we want to talk about from like non-Latin America context, which is something that we are just in design phase. So this is for spa workers in China, where we are essentially designing a program for these workers now, using what we have done in the past, but then kind of building into very specific things that businesses want or the things want, because uh, for all the rest of the programs that we talked about, these were not essentially customer forcing program. So this module where it's like a worker essentially taking an order from a customer and then getting a payment based on that order, which is a very different context than compared to earlier. So the program had to be designed keeping the cultural context of the geography, but also essentially very different business context. This is just an overview of the majorly intervention or training curriculum. We'll talk more about the impact and mechanisms later. Over to you, Rashid.
Thanks, Smit. Andrea, if you could walk us through some of our Latin America projects, please.
Okay, thank you, Rashid. Thank you, Smit. Good morning or good night, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I am Andrea. I'm holding our projects in Latin America, and we are going to discuss some of them today. Essentially, in this presentation, we will explore some of the soft skills projects that we are carrying out in retail and quick service restaurant industries to enhance their workforce capabilities and drive business growth. I think that soft skills such as communication, teamwork, customer service, adaptability, and problem solving are essential for creating exceptional customer experience and fostering a positive work environment. That's why these projects aim to develop and strengthen soft skills among employees, leading to improved customer satisfaction, increased employee engagement, and higher productivity levels. Through a combination of programs, workshops, and ongoing development initiatives, companies in retail and quick service restaurant industry are investing in their employees' personal and professional growth. So, to go into these projects today, we have three focus questions. The first one is one that we have been exploring is how do the allocation decisions of managers change in the face of a large demand shock? Also, can performance monitoring technology boost productivity gains? And the last one, what are the issues faced by women in managerial positions as they progress towards reaching those goals? Next slide, please. Okay, first, we would like to talk about the integral role of adapting to external shocks in managing an organization. Specifically, we explore how the allocation decisions of managers change in the face of a large demand shock. This research aims to uncover the inner dynamics within stores, focusing on the gender composition of the workforce and its interaction with managers. So the study that we conduct highlights the impact of gender compositions within a store, because we noticed that following the demand shocks, an average increase of sales was observed. But however, a deeper analysis revealed that significant disparity based on gender balance within managerial positions and crew members. What we understand about imbalanced stores. We define imbalanced stores as those where the absolute value of the share of female or male managers is larger than the share of female or male crew members. So we found that in the stores with a balanced gender composition exhibit a sales increase in 30% larger than the average stores and twice larger than imbalanced gender stores. With this, we can conclude that a gender balance within workforce significantly influences the sales performance following a demand shock. Our hypothesis about this is that balanced stores were better equipped to adjust the quality and quantity of their workforce. Balanced stores could train their existing crew more effectively, hire additional workers, or increase working hours. We think that while gender homogeneity is not a practical or desirable outcome, it plays a role in higher sales following of demand shock. We think future work will focus on developing and implementing training to help gender diverse teams close to the productivity gap. We think also that informed sensitive training can help the teams of any gender balance respond effectively to demand shocks. Also, adapting to external shocks is crucial for organization success. Please, next slide. Oh, okay. Continue with the second principal question. Are you hearing me right? I mean, I need to speak louder.
Yeah, if you could just a little bit. We can hear you fine, but just a little louder.
Okay. Okay, continue with the second principal question. We will dive into relationship between performance monitoring technology and productivity in the context of the quick service restaurant industry. Specifically, in this project, we explore the implementation of a drive-through performance monitoring system in Puerto Rico and its impact on store performance indicators. We aim to answer questions such as, can performance monitoring technology alone boost productivity gains? Does it affect hiring practices? Can managers implement other programs to support gains observed by monitoring technology? Following the implementation of the monitoring technology, sales increased by nearly 5%. However, we observe that this rise in sales was primarily due to short tenures of the employees. Within a short time, the impacts regressed to roughly a half of the initial magnitude. So these findings indicate that while the monitoring technology initial boosts sales rate, its effects tends to diminish over the time. We observe also that managers respond to the ability of real-time data on bottlenecks by providing grading training inputs to workers at a key workstation, particularly in the kitchen. This response suggests to us that managers use the monitoring technology to identify areas where additional training was needed. However, it was found that only a subset of managers provided refresher training to counteract skill depreciation over the time. Also, we observed that stores where managers use refresher training incessantly prior to the technology implementation experienced more percent gains in sales. These findings suggest to us that managers' attention can respond to worker skill dynamics play a crucial role in sustaining productivity gains. It highlights the importance of one of the job human capital investment in conjunction with performance monitoring technology. While the initial implementation of monitoring technology led to a sales increase, as we observed, its effects diminish over the time. Therefore, we observe that performance monitoring technology alone cannot ensure long-term productivity gains. Therefore, we conclude that to support the gains observed through monitoring technology, managers should implement comprehensive programs that prioritize skill development and employee training. The next, yeah. Okay, to address the last focus question about women, I would like to divide it in two parts. First, women in managerial positions, and second, women getting into managerial positions. So first, I would like to present our research on assessing the components of managerial quality and their impact on store performance. In this project, we explore the relationship between numerous managerial traits, skills, and practices and their contribution to store performance. Additionally, we aim to examine the role of resource allocation skills predicting store performance, taking into consideration other dimensions of managerial quality. We aim to carry out a comprehensive survey of retail store managers in Colombia. The survey covers several aspects such as work history, leadership, style, management practices, personal traits, cognitive skills, demographics, and discriminatory attitudes. In the process of analyzing the survey results and linking them to store-level records on sales, performance, absenteeism, and worker turnover, we can determine the influence of different managerial components on store performance. Then we observe that female managers perceive their activities as requiring fewer complex skills, but on the other hand, they think they face more challenges in meeting long-term goals compared to their male counterparts. Also, another interesting result is we found that female managers engage in retrospective analysis for improvement and assign employees to specific tasks more frequently than male managers. And another salient result is that female managers prioritize initial training quality for long-term goal achievement more than male managers. Taking the above in consideration, our research indicates that different managerial components have varied impacts on store performance. Female managers exhibit unique traits and practices that can contribute overall of performance, reduce allocation skills, such as computing and using work-specific comparative advantage, may significantly predict store performance, even when consideration all other dimensions of managerial quality. Besides, we believe that understanding these diverse strengths and practices of managers with a gender-relevant component can lead to more effective strategies for improving store performance. The next one, please. Okay, and for the last part of the last question, I would like to talk about women getting into managerial positions. We will discuss our research that aims to explore the structural and societal barriers that have historically prevented women from filling higher paid or lower turnover entry-level positions. We focus on entry-level positions because we found a significant gender imbalances exist despite existing training programs designed to empower women. Our study in this case aims to tackle the issue of gender segregation across positions within stores. We have identified where gender imbalances are a concern, such as cashier, predominantly by women, and bakers, butchers, and chefs, predominantly by men. And it's worried that female-concentrated positions offer lower salaries compared to the male-concentrated positions. We are going to carry out a survey-based experiment to understand worker job preference and their influence on the self-sorting into different positions. This allows us to identify job characteristics that may deter women for applying and design future intervention. We will analyze data to understand how different attributes influence job preference, include specific gender patterns, skill requirements, physical demands, earnings, level of interaction with manager, promotion opportunity, and scheduling flexibility affect that decision to the workers. We expect findings that will inform on future intervention, helping to reduce gender segregation and create equal opportunities within a store. We believe that addressing gender segregation in entry-level position is crucial for promoting gender equity. Also, we think this is vital to create inclusive work environments and empower all the employees to reach their full potential. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Andrea. Thank you, Smit. With this, we are going to move into the discussion section of the panel. So again, I would like to encourage the audience to leave any questions that they have in the chat box, and we will take them up as we go. So again, thank you very much for setting the context and talking about these projects. I have a first most basic question for both of you, which is, why do we hesitate to universalize our research in the first place? Right, we're working on similar themes in these different industries and countries. What is stopping us from universalizing our research findings?
I mean, there's one basic thing I think everyone is that for example, we are giving some answers to some questions, and the basic thing is the questions might be relevant or not relevant in some settings. That's a first basic thing to think about this, right? For example, if you're done soft skills training, and then we can't just go and ask everybody to do soft skills training. It might be that that might not be a barrier at some place, right? So that's a first basic thing to consider, where the question you're answering, are the questions themselves relevant or not, right? That's the first thing. And the second thing is, so for example, everyone who is a development practitioner thinks about theory of change whenever they're thinking about intervention, its impact, how it's going, right? We think about mechanisms, and these mechanisms are very important to not just the final numbers, but the mechanism through which we achieve those outcomes, right? And those are very critical to check if those are still applicable in different settings, right? And for our kind of this context specifically, I want to highlight two major axes through which things can differ. One is on industries themselves. So the problems that industries have would be different across industries, right? And along with that, other things is geographic and social and cultural norms that they have. And from these two axes, once you start considering, some things might be similar and some things might be different. And when we are talking about very small things, right, like so soft skills training or kind of promotion of women into managerial position, gender composition of workplace, in those cases, both of those things starts mattering. So that's why we want to understand the context much better, the mechanisms much better. And then the idea is to, once you kind of start doing this at multiple industries across multiple geographies, you start getting some mechanisms that remain very central, which are kind of things that you can bank on to be kind of work in different settings, like same direction, maybe magnitudes might be higher or lower, but the directions are something that you have start feeling more confident about, right? And that's the where we would want to go in general for this, but overall as a academic or development community.
Andrea, would you like to add?
Okay, but just for complementing a little bit, I think that the hesitation to universalize our research in the context of Latin America stems from recognizing the diverse sociocultural, economic, and political landscapes within the region. I know that each setting has its unique dynamics and challenges, requiring context-specific approach, as Smit was saying. Particularly to motivate or work on numerous projects in different settings on the same theme, we draw inspiration from existing literature and preliminary findings that highlight the relevance and impact of addressing soft skills, for example, in the region. Taking into account the main topic of today, I think that these resources provide valuable insights into the importance of soft skills development for economic growth, social mobility, and individual well-being.
Yeah. Thank you. Smith, you mentioned that once you do enough number of these projects, there are certain mechanisms that you see working across. And so before we really get into the differences, I want to ask about those. What are the patterns that we've noticed in these projects? And for example, why the emphasis on soft skills?
Yeah, so I think there are multiple. So, for example, soft skills are one of the ways to improve human capital, and there are multiple ways, right? But I think specifically talking about like um, uh, blue collar workforce or essentially labor intensive factories in many cases, what we observe where businesses systematically underinvest or underemphasize soft skills. So for a lot of these businesses, it's very clear to them that if you have say garment produced, you need to make sure your workers are very well trained on sewing machines, right? Or if, for example, if you talk ILO program, they know if there's a clear machine, they have very clear scheduled training programs for workers to kind of make sure they're up to date on the skills of operating a particular machines, right? Because it's very clear to them, it's tangible, right? What one of the most important thing that we've learned is soft skills because it's difficult to measure, it's difficult to define that way. It gets systematically underinvested in. And that's a very clear theme that emerges everywhere where from management perspective, they don't understand how important it is and they underinvest and not being given enough focus. And everywhere we have done, it's one of the great part about this and the reason why we focus on this, it always is a great return on investment for businesses because as it is something which is important and under respect, any investment businesses make or any investment that is made to kind of bring those skills up gains huge benefits for businesses because the cost of training is very little compared to say bringing in new machinery or any big investment, right? It's investment that requires time of trainers or the workers and a curriculum and some other things, but overall it's a low cost investment to make. And that's why we think it's a low hanging fruit for most of the businesses to gain help workers to become better as well as then businesses can gain themselves. So these are clear themes where we think that's why soft skills are important. There are clear themes that emerge, right? One of in terms of impact, we definitely see impacts through attendance of workers. So, irrespective of anything, it's just a great worker motivation and retention tool to give them a training, right? That in itself, essentially, Professor Raghunathan from Stanford has a good paper, a great paper, which is titled like "Train Them to Retain Them," right? Essentially, just like training itself is a good motivator to workers to come to businesses come to other workplace, have more attendance, as well as then a second aspect we think is teamwork and communication is a major mechanism. And then the third part, which we try to highlight in almost all our program is peer learning, which essentially starts giving a important mechanism for people to learn. So I do think like these are the key themes that we have seen emerge across different contexts. And those are the things I think we think are important for all the programs that we would want to do.
That makes a lot of sense. Moving on from that, and we also have a question from the audience along the same lines, which is how social norms might play into our research and analysis, right? So where and how have we had to bring in cultural nuance in our project? If you can give some tangible examples of how these nuances have impacted what data we gather, how we gather it, and how we design our intervention.
Yeah, so I think that's a very pertinent question. Uh, so I'll try to be specific at one now, right? So one of the major thing that we want to do is essentially get more women into managerial positions. And that's where social norm becomes tremendously important, right? There are essentially mental models from both ends. So mental models of women workers that you need to change, as well as essentially mental managers of people who are hiring or the factory management. So in this case, for example, a lot of women workers in garment factories think that men are better managers. So there is a recent work of Machiavelli et al. In Bangladesh, where they clearly show that women think that men are better at technical skills, right? And men also think men are better at technical skills. But when they measure technical skills, they found that it's equal, right? So these are the mental models. So the reason why they are targeting this is to kind of essentially look at the data and actually see whether these mental models are true. If these mental models are not true, then the next thing would be how do you change these things to bring an optimal level of it, right? So I think so you think about this case, then how does it translate into research design is that when you see some of these pattern emerge in your scoping study, right? When you're talking to workers doing design work, then when you see these things, you realize this is an important mechanism which is a barrier for your intervention, right? Either your intervention is targeting it. So you first stage, you measure whether it exists in your study sample. You see how it changes at the end line, and then you kind of then associate how it changed, right? So that's why you would kind of bring it social norm there. There are a lot of things that are happening in India where, for example, for research design, it becomes a very important question because just to give an example, right? Um, Mobility is a big constraint. For example, local context matter because, for example, we had tried to do like a 5-day work week program for women in garment factories in India, right? And that didn't work. The one of the major reason was women thought they wanted to go home early and do the household chores. That's a very local problem. The second problem was transports. Like if you wanted to do research where some of the fact, like do a randomized control trial where some fact production lines would get 5 days versus some would remain on 6 days work week, the major logistical challenge was that women use same transport, and that becomes such a key thing to solve that the intervention couldn't go ahead because women couldn't wait and we couldn't solve that logistical challenge. So that becomes a very local thing where how do women come to work, and that kind of determines entirety of your kind of research design. So these are some of couple of things that we have had. And social norms is very tricky because um, you sometimes when the interventions are designed to change these norms, it becomes very important to design essentially questionnaires to measure what we're going to measure, right? And making sure we're measuring it accurately, those instruments are validated, and then move it from there to change them.
That was very interesting. And as you mentioned, one of our focuses in South Asia has been, increasing the participation of women at managerial level. Andrea, can you highlight how this has looked different in the context of South America?
Yeah. I think that incorporating cultural nuance is essential in our projects to ensure their effectiveness and relevance in a specific context. Also, before we start a research, we make a deliberate effort to understand the local context by conducting through literature review, engaging with local stakeholders, and seeking input from community members. That's why we make usually an initial approach with the community to ask what they perceive, what they feel, what are the issues that they think they have or they think we need to explore. And this helps us to grasp cultural norms, value, gender beliefs, and practices that influence work dynamics and employee behavior.
And specifically, thanks for that. Specifically, when we're talking about women in managerial positions, I remember talking to you both about this project while we were preparing for the panel, and somebody's also asked this in the chat where they've asked curious to know what are the differences and challenges faced by blue collar workforce. So I do recall that in the initial studies, in the initial scoping work that we did, we found that the participation of women at managerial levels in Latin America is much better than it is in South Asia. So that was not the challenge or the problem that we were trying to solve there. Could you elaborate a little more on that?
Yeah, sure. The gender gap in workforce is a significant concern even in development countries, and our research projects specifically address these issues in different ways, but we are trying to focus on that. We know that gender gaps can manifest differently across various settings due to cultural norms, legal frameworks, and society expectations. Particularly in Colombia, we had different expectations going on. As you said, the numbers showed us much higher participation of women in managerial levels. This prompted us to dig deeper and look at what are the issues that faced by women in these dynamics. For example, in one of the projects that we discussed before, we found that the friction between gender imbalances themes shows that there is a gap in communication that negatively impacts productivity, sales, and responses to shock at the same time. And in the second one, is related project that we can observe that even with high participation of women in the labor force in the primary level, they will be important to identify what are the factors that cause women to self-select into lower paying professions within the same firm. Our research incorporates a gender-sensitive lens by examining the unique challenge and opportunities faced by women in different contexts. This involves exploring barriers to women to participate of the workforce, gender disparity in access to training and career advancement, and identifying strategies to promote gender equality in the workplace.
And Smit, how does this gender gap in our work with it look significantly different here in South Asia?
I mean, so it's a very well established fact that the labor force participation in India is one of the lowest. But that's just kind of first layer of this, right? In many industries, this gaps becomes tremendously high as you start going up the ladder, right? So, for example, in garment sector factories, when we kind of did the study, the men, like around, you see 80% of women workers uh, in production lines, but on the supervisor level, there are 80% are men, right? This is now with consistent effort, this has come down. I'm talking about 2017, 2018 numbers where this has gone down about 50 to 60% now, but still it's a staggering gap when we see it. And as Andrew was saying, it's a very clear case where the roles are many times gender segregated, where if you go to any garment sector factory, you see men, there are lines, production lines, which are predominantly men. And these are usually roles where they're either doing cutting jobs or they're doing sampling jobs, which are stitching entire garment as a first piece rather than on a production line. And you see, eventually, these are the cases where men are paid much more than women. So there is not just like women are not in the, like their self-selection into high-paying job seems to be a very important driver of these things, even in India, as Andrea was saying, is there. And along with that, there are very, as Rushida had asked, like very strong mental models as well as societal constraints, right? First, mental models are women themselves many times don't think that it's their job to be a supervisor. So, for example, many times they'll see the supervisors who is shouting, and in their head, to become supervisor, you should be able to shout at people, right? That's what they're learning, and then they don't want to be. There are clear like social constraints where if women are expected, like Time News data in India shows that women do disproportionately large amount of household chores and care work, right? So many of the women workers need to complete their household chores, finish it in the morning, then come to factory, then go back and do the same thing, right? So then when they want to move to higher responsibilities where they might have to stay back for a few more, like half an hour, 1 hour to do something, they think that it won't, like their kind of existing social structures won't allow it for them, or will make it hard for them, right? So all of this combined to essentially start adding gender gaps where, and this essentially gets reinforced from the top, where the people who are making these hiring decisions might think that women can't do this job, right? So all of these things you need to start kind of addressing each of them to start making change in this case. And the gender gap is many times same women getting paid less for the job. That exists, but that's not the biggest factor that explains in India, at least in the sector we're working in. The major change is explained by essentially women not kind of taking up the high paying jobs.
So you both talked a lot about, gathering data and how that's very important to understand the mental models, to understand societal norms, and then also eventually to design any sort of intervention that we want to do. But from my understanding, even the data collection in itself, the very tangible process of data collection differs depending on the context you're working in. Do you want to give us a few examples which tell us how this has worked in different contexts?
Yeah, it's very clear, right? So it's essentially in India, right? When we're doing for a lot of time with garment workers, um, one of the easiest way to do is to do self-administered questionnaires, right? But that becomes almost impossible to do because of the literacy level and comprehension level of these workers. Um, and that gets compounded by if you want to collect a digital data collection, the digital literacy, right? So when you have these barriers, the data collection becomes even harder, right? So one of the classic example that we have always had is, for example, when we do kind of mental health related questionnaire, um, the kind of clear cases like I feel blue, right? And then you kind of rate things. And for this, think this question many times when is designed for white collar workers, uh, and then they can understand what it means and they can ask like from scale of not never to very often, right? On the scale of 1 to 5. But when you think about doing this for workers, you need to translate it in their dialect. The enumerator should be able to see that worker, and essentially when you ask question, the enumerator needs to be able to understand whether the worker is getting it, able to give right prompts, right? And these becomes a lot of additional thing for workers, right? But if you are operating in a different setting, then you can just do a self-administered question that can essentially solve a lot of things, right? So as uh, like lower the literacy, difficult the terrain, more marginalize the community, the harder job it starts becoming to get the accurate response.
Okay. I just want to add that I agree with Smit. I think cultural nuances impact data collection, include adapting surveys, instruments, and interview protocols, account for local expression, customs, and sensitives. I think it's important to using culturally appropriate language and framing questions in ways that resonate with participants. I think that data collection may vary depending on demographics that we are working with, considering age, gender, education level, and occupation to ensure inclusivity and relevance.
Yeah, and from what I'm aware of in Latin America, we've been using a lot of these digital self-administered surveys, which is allowing us to work with a large data set, almost like countrywide data sets, right? Because you don't need the field team to be going into every store and assessing this. So that's very interesting. We've discussed earlier, and I specifically brought up working with researchers that are from the context that we're trying to do the research in, right? And how that's important in getting a step forward towards understanding these norms. But this is a debated topic, right? Like conducting research in your own context. What do you think? That does that make the researcher lose their objectivity? Or is that outweighed by the deeper understanding that the researcher can bring to the project?
Okay. I think that conducting research in our own context, in context of Latin America, can present a unique sets of challenges and opportunities. While it's true that conducting research in our own context can potentially introduce bias or influence of objectivity, it's also accompanied by several advantages that we can outweigh these concerns. I can think in maybe four advantage. The first one I think is deeper understanding. I think when a researcher is familiar with the cultural, social, and economic nuances of their own context, can bring a deeper understanding and contextual knowledge of the research project. I think this familiarity allows us to identify relevant research questions, design appropriate methodology, and interpret findings more accurately. The second one that I think is an advantage is access to a local network. I think we often have established networks in relationships with key stakeholders, including community members, policymakers, and organizations. I think this facilitates access to research participants, data sources, and relevant information, enable a more comprehensive analysis. The third one, I think, is trust. I think that being a part of the same cultural and linguistic context as the participants can foster a sense of trust, making it easier for researchers to engage with gather data and respondents. This leads to a more open and honest response, enhancing the quality and the validity of the research findings. And the last one, I think, is ethical consideration. I think that researchers who are embedded in local context may have a better understanding of ethical considerations and cultural sensitivities involved in the research project. And this allows us to navigate ethical dilemmas and ensure that research respects the rights and dignity of the participants. However, in the second part of the question, I think it's crucial for researchers to be mindful of their bias and take measures to mitigate the influence of research process. I think they can include employing rigorous research methodologies, engaging in reflexivity to acknowledge and address potential bias, seeking input and collaboration from colleagues or peers who are external to the context, and maintaining transparency, accountability through the research process. I think that in Latin America, for conclusion, while conducting a research in our own context may introduce challenges related to objectivity, the deeper understanding and the contextual knowledge gained by research cannot outweigh that concern. I think that with careful attention to bias and commitment with rigorous research practices, in Latin America, we can contribute to produce valuable insights and solutions that are relevant for the region.
Thank you, Andrea. That was a very insightful answer. We are almost towards the end of the session, so I have one last question to pose to both of you. We've talked about how we work with cultural context, but what have been some of our blind spots? Areas where we are still looking to improve our understanding and areas where we can do better.
I think we still need. I feel that even if we do scoping work, I do think we need more kind of voices or opinion coming from workers for what they need. I think I won't call it a blind spot, but I would say it's more effort. Those are needed. And for kind of thinking about blind spot, uh, I think just like thinking same as what Andre's been saying, right? Like just like not taking a fresh perspective in every context. Go and like not doing enough kind of pre-work before getting into new things. I think that's the kind of blind spot I think we are should be worried about. We have like thinking about geographies and industries, we are still at a very nascent stage of this, right? So that's why we have been able. I'm more worried when we start scaling things up, when we go to different industries, when you don't have enough time, the way research offers. That's where I am more worried about. Where like some of these starts emerging more often, where you're starting to taking things that are developed in one settings into other settings without having that much uh, room to kind of tweak things, do basic research, and that's what thing I'll be able to. I've been more worried where trying to find the sweet spot where you are taking learnings and replicating with low cost uh, changes, but still maintaining the essence of the program. That's what I'm most interested in as a next step.
Um, as Smith, I think I can think in three areas that we are actively seeking to improve our understanding. I think in intersectionality, long-term impact, and policy implications. I think in intersectionality, we aim to better understand how intersecting factors such as race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, geographical location impacts individual access to opportunities and their experience in labor markets. About the long-term impact, I think we are working to get more data and conduct follow-up studies to assess the long-term effects of soft skill development of individual career trajectories, job satisfaction, and overall well-being. And for policy implications, I think that exploring the policy implication of our research findings aiming to contribute to evidence-based policy recommendations that can support the integration of soft skills development initiatives into a broader workforce development strategy. By addressing these blind spots, we can strive for improvement and aim to enhance the robustness and applicability of our research in Latin America.
Thank you both for humoring me today and for a very engaging discussion for all our panelists. And if we have any concluding thoughts that either of you would like to share, we can do that before we close out the session for today.
For me, I think the main thing takeaway from just talking today and going the prep work is the need to document all of these things, right? It's one thing for somebody to kind of adopt things for a cultural context, make changes. But one of the key thing for me is to kind of start doing this more systematically while saying that, hey, we did this 4 changes for these particular reasons and one and then that needs to be kind of shared across community, right? Where it starts like I think that's where we start kind of building onto each other, not just our own work but everybody's work, where and that's where some of the things start becoming more scalable. And I do think like uh, for example some like at least some rules about, hey, if you take this program to this context, these are the key things to take note of, and that might reduce this tailoring time reduced by half for other researchers, right, or other program. And that's what I feel is going to be key to kind of start thinking about cultural context in relative way. I think that might be something that I'll think more about from this.
Yeah, as we had started the presentation, want to conclude with the same thought that it's a delicate balance to maintain, to make sure that you are incorporating cultural context, but that you're not starting from scratch as well, that you are able to build on the research that you're doing in different regions and make sure that it's a collaborative learning process for everybody involved. Well, I hope this was a collaborative learning experience for everybody involved here today. Thank you so much for joining us. And we hope that you took something from this discussion that can help you in your work. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody, for your time.
Thanks everyone for joining.